intelligencesquared.com.
Well, I'm glad to be able to say that I want to echo much of what the previous speaker said, and indeed I feel much the way he does, except I think I end in a different place. Firstly, to echo what he said about this whole debate, how good it is that we're not divided on the usual Israeli or Palestinian or Jewish or Arab lines, but instead, if not exactly into optimists and pessimists, into the despondent and the slightly less despondent. And I'm in that latter camp. But I agree with what Yazid said. It would be very easy, is my guess, for any of the people on this panel tonight to swap sides and to argue equally confidently the other side, because so much of what we can describe is in common, even if we want to prescribe something else. But I'm going to be on that other side, partly because I just want to be positive, but aware all the time that the risks that Yazid has just pointed out are all real. The key word in this resolution is that word ripe. It doesn't mean that this conflict is about to be resolved, it just means that it could be, that it's ready. It's the difference between saying that this fruit is ready to be picked and that it is going to be picked. And the point is that that is a choice that has to be made. Why do I say it's ready? Why do I say it's ripe? Firstly, you have to look underneath the surface. And the surface, we all agree, looks unbelievably bleak. But underneath the surface, I think there has been a tectonic shift. And you heard some of it from what Yazid was saying. The polling on both sides is extraordinary, the paradox of those polls. On the Israeli side, an electorate which supports Ariel Sharon so overwhelmingly that it's just handed him this huge landslide, the very same electorate, the same people, to the tune of 70% or more, now say they're ready for a deal, and they're explicit and aware of what that deal would mean, the price they would have to pay. They accept those Clinton parameters that we may hear something more about from Jamie Rubin, who was involved in that process. They accept that most of the West Bank and Gaza will have to be returned, with accommodation about some of the detail and some swapping here and there to make it all add up. They accept that Jerusalem in the end is going to have to be shared as a capital between the two peoples. These are ideas that were once radioactive in Israeli politics, and they're now more or less accepted. And accepted too that eventually there will have to be some kind of compensation, restitution, settlement, a reckoning with the refugees created in 1948 and after. On the Palestinian side, again, on the outside what you see are the same opinion polls which say, despairingly, heartbreakingly actually, and shockingly, that there is support for suicide bombing. And yet in the very same opinion poll, those same Palestinians will say that they accept a Jewish state in the pre-1967 borders, that they have made that historic compromise sealed in Algiers in 1988, where the Palestinian people have accepted more or less 22% of historic Palestine. Yes, there are questions still outstanding. This point about the refugees is going to be a huge and knotty issue, almost impossible, and yet not impossible in the end through negotiation that would have to be unbelievably sensitive and rigorous all at once. That is soluble, tough but soluble. So he says, and I think he's right, that these opinion polls are tied to hope. And yet what could be more hopeless than the last 2 years of horrible, murderous violence on both sides, and yet those opinion poll findings have not only held up, they have hardened. More and more people have come to these conclusions, often reluctantly, but they've now come to those conclusions. As evidence, and a perfect sort of microcosm of this point of how things look bleak on the outside but better when you look closer, look at the last Israeli election. Now that, if you want despondent, those findings felt terrible if you're in the peace camp, but look closer. There are crumbs of comfort there. The parties of the far right, the nationalist right, in Israel either stagnated or fell in their support. The Cherut party, a horrible, viciously right-wing party, did not clear the threshold to get in, and the religious parties have now been matched by the militantly secular Shinui party. More importantly, look who won, and look how he won. Ariel Sharon's Likud gained enormously, but on what terms? One, Ariel Sharon himself said, and fought a battle inside his own party to say, that he supported in the end the creation of a Palestinian state. He said things that, as somebody has recently joked, if he had said them sitting inside the Israeli Labour Party in the 1970s, Golda Meir would have thrown him out as a pro-Palestinian, dangerous sympathiser and a lunatic left-winger. That's how Ariel Sharon won this election. And what was his second promise? That he would not rule in an extreme right-wing government, but instead in a national unity government. Now, I don't mention these to say that somehow Ariel Sharon has been converted overnight into some reformed, peacenik leftist. Of course not. But it tells you something about what he felt he needed to say to his electorate to get elected. It tells you that the Israeli electorate has shifted. In the same election, Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, did not vote for Islamist parties, but instead voted still for mainstream or secular parties. And that people on the Palestinian side, and I think there's a lot of evidence for this, borne out by some of those meetings that are going on in Cairo, are getting exhausted by the ongoing violence, and deep questions are being asked about where is this intifada going. These are all signs that mood and opinion is shifting and that the peoples are right, they're ready. Why, then, is this not happening? Well, Yazid Said said it, and I think he's right. I think cowardice is a word that can be applied to both leaderships. They are frightened of making this deal. The peoples are ahead of them. They know what the deal has to be, but the leaders cannot bring themselves to make it. And we can talk all night about why that might be. The truth is, though, I don't think either feel able or willing to make this deal as long as the other is there. And you've got yourself into this odd embrace, this paralysis from the two. I think Sharon won't move, and he has this particular thing with Arafat, and I think equally that Arafat lacks the strategic vision, and some may even say the moral equipment to make this deal. And Yazid said about a failure of moral leadership, and I do wonder if Yasser Arafat was one of those people who history will record as a revolutionary leader, but not a nation builder. So those people are obstacles, but in the most plain way that can be stated, neither of these men will live forever. And to draw your conclusion about the insolubility of this conflict based on the presence of these two men in their 70s, I think is flawed thinking. They are here now, and that is a cause for pessimism, but they will not be there forever. And we can think, and need to think creatively about getting around them. So yes, there are big problems in the way. The refugee question has to be resolved. The settlement blocks are there and require enormous creative thinking to overcome. But I would say that even so, underlying, the underpinning tectonic plates of this conflict tell me it's ripe, and it's not just ripe. And this is the reason why I would really encourage you to vote yes tonight. It's not ripe and just ripe, it's actually urgent for resolution. Because what does the word ripe mean? It means that if you leave something too long, it gets overripe and rotten. And that is the risk that we face here. That could be happening before our eyes. Yazid has highlighted the dangers of a two-state solution slipping from our grasp and becoming impossible. Physically impossible because of those settlement blocks that are there, and psychologically impossible as people begin to think of this more and more as a one conflict between the river and the sea, between these two peoples of more or less equal population. So I would say to American public opinion and American government, which is so crucial, this conflict is ripe for resolution. But the intervention of you and your president, which is in the end the only factor that can move this thing along, is the intervention of the American president, is not just needed, but it's urgently needed. And we cannot wait till this is too late. And that's why I would urge you to vote for the motion.